The United Nations Environment Programme's Emissions Gap Report is an authoritative assessment undertaken by a team of leading scientists and modeling experts from around the world. It presents an assessment of the 119 intended nationally determined contributions submitted to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change by 1st of October 2015, covering 146 countries, including the European Union submitting as a bloc, and up to 88% of global greenhouse gas emissions in 2012. The INDCs represent greenhouse gas emission reductions of 4 to 6 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year in 2030 compared to projected emissions on the current policy trajectories. 2030 projections based on current policies are themselves 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, lower than the estimate of 65 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. Based on the IPCC's fifth assessment report scenarios, which assumes no additional climate policies are put in place after 2010. This indicates that efforts to tackle climate change, including those taken before the Paris Agreement and full implementation of the INDCs, could cut up to 11 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent from projected emissions in 2030. This is, however, around half of the total required to reach the global emission level of 42 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2030, consistent with having a likely chance of more than 66% of staying below the 2 degrees Celsius target in 2100.
2030 is just really our first stopping off point, because as our director said, it is important to remember that to keep within the IPCC guidelines of 1,000 gigatons in the atmosphere to avoid the 2 degree, to going above the 2 degree trajectory, we need to be in net zero emissions at least by the second half of this century. So the 2030 destination, so to speak, is the first stop. We need to do more and continue to do more to stay on track.
The challenge is to bend the emissions trajectory down as soon as possible to ensure that the net zero emissions goal between 2060 and 2075 is within reach.
The report is based on the best available scientific evidence and combines knowledge from all over the world. It tells us some very important things. First of all, it tells us that the current policies are working and they're helping to actually limit the amount of emissions of greenhouse gases. But the new pledges, the actual decisions made by countries of what they're going to do up until 2030 are really crucial. They add not only to the emissions reductions, but they start the transformation for society to really tackle climate change in the longer term. Are they enough? No, we need to do a lot more. What they do as a package is bring us onto a 3 degree centigrade trajectory, which means that we have not avoided dangerous climate change. To make that shift, to bring us into the safe limits of being below 2 degrees centigrade by the end of the century, we have many options. And the Emissions Gap Report contains many of those ideas, whether it's in energy efficiency, the way our buildings operate, the way we grow our food, ultimately the way we live in society. Those options are there for the taking, but early action is really crucial. It not only reduces the cost, but it means that we bend the trend sooner and we can see that transformation happening throughout society much more quickly, and we can generate a new way of dealing with some of the problems.
UNEP scientists believe the INDCs will likely have benefits beyond the estimated reductions to greenhouse gas emission levels as new climate policies and actions are being galvanized by the process. The preparation of the INDCs has incentivized the exploration of links between development and climate and the development of new national climate policies, and may be considered as a first step in a transition towards low-carbon economies. The scientists say the Paris Agreement could build on and support these processes and provide the framework for mobilization of the enhanced mitigation efforts required. Some others believe the INDCs are not enough.
Right now you can imagine climate policy like as it is envisaged with the INDCs. It is a bit like a collection box after church service, right? So everybody just gives what they want. That is fine. It was a major mistake, or not mistake, but it was a problem of Kyoto that countries were kind of forced, etc., and it was not basically covered by their national aims and policies. I agree with that. But however, like for climate change, we really need some international commitment, because right now these are just some plans to do something against climate change, right? So nobody will know whether those plans actually transform into actual policies. And this will be the next step. So I think Paris will be a step in the right direction, basically due to the reasons that you said. But like, we also need to think after Paris, and we also will need to think now how these INDCs can be transformed into actual policies on the ground that will change something. And this will still be a major challenge.
Governments have made some progress towards a goal of limiting warming of the planet with national plans for action. But according to a French government working document, more than 30 core questions remain unsolved before the November 30 to December 11th summit on global warming starts in Paris. An ambitious agreement on limiting global warming at the upcoming COP21 climate conference is an absolute necessity. The French foreign minister agrees this much. He said that progress had been made on a number of important points during a 3-day meeting which saw 70 officials from about 60 countries come together to find possible compromises for a deal. One of the points he said that was explored further during the negotiations was the need for an assessment of countries' progress every 5 years.
Face à la gravité de ces menaces, nous avons, en ce qui concerne la conférence de Paris,
confronted by the gravity of these threats, success at the Paris conference is an absolute necessity. What struck me, along with my colleagues, in these negotiations over these past 3 days was that the sense of necessity, despite the differences between, is what clear to see.
Quelle que soit la différence des uns et des autres, elle était palpable.
An assessment should be undertaken every 5 years, focusing on the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, adaptation and financing, which will allow us to formulate national propositions upwards. This was an idea which was not only in the either, but was also present in several documents, and particularly in the joint statement by France and China. Today, these ideas gain sufficient ground to be accepted by everybody involved.
Et je crois qu'aujourd'hui, cette idée a suffisamment fait son chemin pour qu'elle soit acceptée par tous.
Senior officials from almost 200 nations will meet for the conference in Paris to try to rise above the collapse of the last global effort in Copenhagen in 2009 and come to an agreement.
That ministers reaffirm that it continues to be entirely possible to come to an agreement, despite the complexities which are evident to all, despite the current length of the text, despite all challenges that are in front of us, it continues to be entirely possible.
However, while European Union and developing nations are among those urging an internationally binding text, others, such as the United States, want only national enforcement.